Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, devotees, Haribol, very happy to see you again. We should start now, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Maharaj.
Okay. Let us begin. Just a moment. Let's see now. Okay. Chapter 2. And where is chapter 3? There's chapter 3. Okay. Oops. Hare Krishna. Nama Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha. Paritanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ke. Sri Bhaktivedanta Course Ki Jai. Aha, devotees. So let us begin. Here we are. Right. So we're beginning today. We are going to go through chapter 2 of the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and I'm hoping there will be time also to go through chapter 3, and then tomorrow we'll go through chapter 4 tomorrow, Wednesday, and perhaps Thursday also. Chapter 4, because chapter 4, there's the most purports. So Srila Prabhupada was explaining more there in chapter 4. And it's very amazing particularly the story of Maharaj Ambarish and Devasamuni. That is really quite a story. So anyway, let us go through chapter 2 now. It's if you're familiar with it, you'd know there's not really so much in the way of purports. There are purports, but it's not really so much. It's more historical, because the subject matter, after all, is a lot of it for the whole canto even is description of the descendants of Vaivasvata Manu. So, but in the purports, there are some very interesting subject matters in the second chapter and the third chapter. Second chapter, particularly, at least according to my perception, there's a discussion, Srila Prabhupada discusses about Kula Gurus or family priests who may not be, or oftentimes are not really qualified spiritually, although they may be able to exert a certain amount of influence over the families for whom they are the family priests. So that's the first, as far as I can see, really like substantial point that we can discuss at some length. Then next will be, also from chapter 2, next will be how one particular devotee who's described here, his name is Prishadra, who is one of the sons of Manu, how he responds to being severely chastised by the Kula Guru, the local family priest, who sort of becomes very angry with him for a reason, but it's really excessive, because he is very much in the family priest sort of mood, and he's not really, at least at that particular time, he's not really expressing like real Krishna consciousness, and he's somewhat influenced by the material nature. So that'll be the second thing that we'll discuss at some length. And well, that's very interesting. The basic idea there is how to deal with chastisement. How to deal with chastisement. It's an important subject for us as practicing devotees. How to deal with chastisement, even when it may be sort of not so clear if it was really the right thing, but how to deal with chastisements. And then when we get into chapter 3, which, as I said, I'm assuming we will today, and I'm hoping we'll go right through it, the main thing that comes up in the purports by Prabhupada, and actually there's a few fairly substantial purports by Prabhupada on this particular subject in the third chapter, and that is the roles of ladies. I mean, in essence, that's the basic point. The roles of ladies, the positions, even you could say, of ladies in Krishna consciousness, that sort of thing. And it's very interesting discussion. And there's a lot of very profound information from Srila Prabhupada, if you know where to find it. There's quite a lot of very profound information from Srila Prabhupada about, like you could say in a very classic sense, about the roles of ladies, positions of ladies, and how ladies may conduct themselves, that sort of thing. It's extremely interesting. And, obviously, particularly for ladies, it's particularly interesting, but it's definitely interesting for all of us. So these are the three main points which we'll spend some time on one by one as we go through chapter 2 and then chapter 3. And I was thinking, I'm wondering about the asking of questions. Of course, we all know that generally, like in Bhagavatam classes, in our regular daily classes, Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, sometimes Chaitanya Charitamrita, by Srila Prabhupada's standard, his own practice, we always make allowance, at least, for devotees to ask questions. So I don't know how it works here. I was thinking, it's just because I don't know how you normally do it. One thing I do know is that Srila Prabhupada once, in a class, he asked if there are any questions, and that nobody wanted to ask a question. And Srila Prabhupada said, "Oh, this means then that you know everything," which is generally not really the case. So, I mean, he was using a little sarcasm. Yeah. So I'm open to having questions. Any time. I was thinking that after a couple of few days, or at any time, but I was just thinking at some point we could just have a questions and answers session, if you'd like. I don't know if it's happening in any other way. If any of your other teachers are doing question and answers sessions, I just don't know. But I'm open to it, put it that way. I'm open to it. And if anyone would like to, well, maybe we could discuss at some point how we might do it, or you could tell me how you usually do it. Is that okay? Yeah, so I know I'll leave that up to you. I'll leave that up to you. Oh, look.
Maharaj, Hare Krishna Maharaj.
There's a question from Srinivas.
Different teachers have taken different approach during this course. So you can take the approach that you like. And I can see there is a question in the chat box right now.
I can say, yes. Okay. Well, why don't you put your questions in the chat box as they come, and then maybe like today, we've got tons of time. We've got another two hours plus. So later on in this session, I can have a look at what's there in the chat. And if there's a number of questions, then in the last, however long, last 15 minutes or what, depending on how many questions there are, we could just stop the class and just try and deal with the questions. I think that's okay, isn't it? Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. I could, seeing there's a question there right now from Srinivas Gopal Prabhu. Oh, it's to everyone. Well, I guess it's to me. Is there any specific reason for narrating the story of Sadyumna? Well, that's a good question. In fact, I may have mentioned yesterday, when I first read the 9th canto many years ago, like more than 45, or maybe 45 years ago. Anyway, whenever it was, a long time ago, I asked myself the same question. What on earth is this here for? It's just kind of, you could use the English word, it's a bit bizarre. But I thought, as I was reading it yesterday, going through it yesterday, and the day before yesterday, or the last few days before, I was going through things and preparing and thinking about it all. And actually, Srila Prabhupada does mention, and we talked a little bit about it yesterday, is this whole subject of changing bodies. We all know very well it's such a foundational point in Krishna consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada, the way he presented it yesterday, is that people question, what is there such a thing as reincarnation, change of body? Is there such a thing, or is it just, something fictitious? Is there only one life? Prabhupada was addressing that in one of the purports. And Srila Prabhupada said, and we noted it, that this is like very clear evidence for changing of body, transmigration. And I suggested to you yesterday that, because you're all educated people, and I mean educated in Krishna consciousness also, and I assume you're all preachers. And even if you're not a preacher, you should become one. Having taken these courses, you should then try to distribute this knowledge. So, this point about how we're not this body, we're the soul within the body changes in the course of this lifetime, and then at the end of each lifetime, there's an even greater change, like a total change. This is a very important aspect of Krishna consciousness, meaning of what we present to people as preachers. It's the very first thing, as we all know, that Lord Krishna addresses in Bhagavad Gita, basically. So, but devotees, in my experience, they're often not so familiar with the 9th canto. The 9th canto, the 11th canto, the 12th canto. Devotees are often not so familiar with these cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. I think that up to the 7th with Lord Nrsingadev, 8th with with the story. Well, even the 8th, it may not be devotees may not be so familiar with. So to be able to use information from the later cantos in our preaching in general, but even particularly with the devotees, I think it's a very good thing to do. I think it's a very important thing to do, to help the devotees understand what is in the later cantos and just what's in Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this case, this explanation, which as we read, Prabhupada says, this is proof. Prabhupada, as I recall, used the word proof about reincarnation, change of body. So, yeah, so that's there. Then another, I think, very important point is that this canto is particularly focusing on Vaivasvata Manu and his descendants. And they are extremely important people. They're just of the greatest importance, really. So we see that even in the lives of these very prominent and actually spiritually advanced people who are living in the material world, that sometimes serious problems arise. And therefore we should definitely not think that, like, we're in every evening. For me now, it's the middle of the day, incidentally. It's coming up to 1:00. But every evening I'm doing a seminar on Sri Ishopanishad. Last night, tonight, for Bhakti Shastri. And there's so much, what we're reading now, Mantra 12, Mantra 13, we read last night. Prabhupada's giving so much emphasis to the idea, let's not become interested in going to the heavenly planets. Let us just focus in Krishna consciousness and try to achieve pure devotional service, go back to Godhead, and not become attracted to going to the heavenly planets. So the story of Sadyumana, it's right out of the heavenly planets. And it's not even just the heavenly planets, but it's like the highest, almost the highest level of the heavenly planets. It's higher than just your sort of, ordinary heavenly planets. So even in such places, people can get into really, like, serious difficulty, like what happened to Sadyumana. A really serious problem. It's incredible, actually. So there are three, as I see it, there's sort of three considerations in regard to the story of Sadyumana, which is also going to be mentioned here, at least right in the beginning of the chapter. First is, in the context of Vaivasvata Manu and his family and descendants. Then, just the historical aspect. Then the fact that great difficulty can come to a person, even who's in very high-level heavenly planets. And then thirdly, this point about the change of body. So I see great significance, even though at first, like I said, I couldn't come to grips with it, really. That's what I take away, those three things in particular from the story of Sadyumana. Now, Hema Gopi Devi Dasi, I guess, has asked that, can you kindly help me understand this doubt? Vasishta Muni seems to come in many yugas and different pastimes. I'm wondering if he's special like Narada Muni. You know, we are going to talk about Vasishta Muni because he is the particular person involved when this first, more significant philosophical point of the three that I'm going to try and address today, the point about the Kula Gurus, the family gurus, because he's the family guru of Vaivasvata Manu. So we're going to talk about Vasishta and his position, spiritually. What is his level of advancement? Like that. How should he be seen? We're going to talk about that just probably in a few minutes, actually, like maybe 5 or 10 minutes as we get into the second chapter. So Hema Gopi, if you don't mind, we'll leave it till then. But otherwise, please put questions in, and my idea is towards the end, I'll look at the questions and try and answer the questions. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, now Prabhupada, of course, does give an introduction or like a synopsis, a précis of this chapter, including the main incident, which is at the beginning of the chapter. I won't go through it in the synopsis. I'll just go through it now as we start going through the chapter itself. So first of all, though, let me just mention the three sections here in this chapter. First section is from verse 1 to verse 14. And the subject here is this other son of Vaivasvata Manu, one of the later sons. First son was Sujumana, and that was, what a thing that was. But then I think there was it 10 sons, if I remember correctly. It was something like this. 10 sons. 10 sons of Vaivasvata. So one of them was Prishadra. And in verses 1 to 14, Prishadra gets cursed by his guru, who happens to be Vasishta Muni. But despite being cursed, and as we'll read when we get there in a few minutes, it seems to really be kind of unfair, actually. It seems to be unfair. But Prishadra, he takes it very nicely, which leads us into the discussion on how all devotees should deal with chastisements, at least particularly from their guru, or maybe even in a broader sense, just chastisements in general. So Prishadra, he deals with that cursing. He's actually cursed heavily by Vasishta. He takes it very nicely, and in that very nice mood, he's able to go on and attain perfection and go back to Godhead. Even basically without having to go through the thing which Vasishta cursed him to go through. It's interesting. Because of his humility and sincerity, it seems that pretty much the curse even of his guru was not, at least it wasn't very effective, if it was effective at all. Then second section is from verse 16 to 22, and it's all about descendants. It's all about descendants. Descendants of Manu, of course, but who were the descendants of this son, and then who were the descendants of the son of that son, and all this sort of thing. So first of all, from 16 to 22, the descendants of Karusha, Drishta, and Narishyanta, and then the third section is from verse 23 to 36. That's the end of the chapter. And it's the descendants of Dishta, who is another one of the descendants of a descendant of Manu, Vaivasvata Manu. Right, so those are the three sections. Let's get into the first one, which is the main one, really, in terms of like things that we can get into philosophically and learn things from. So yeah, like we said, it's verse 1 to verse 14, and what happens there is Prishadra, one of these 10 sons of Vaivasvata Manu, who were born after Sudyumna, how Prishadra is cursed by his guru, but then because he takes it very nicely, despite it being, it seems, relatively unfair, he takes it so nicely, he attains perfection. Okay, so now if we look at the verses, well, we mentioned at the end yesterday, or it was written at the end yesterday, how Sudyumna, after his, kind of awkward life as king, ruling, he handed over. Do you remember who he handed over to? Anyway, you can see if you remember who he handed over to. He handed over to Pururava, who is also going to appear again in a little while. He handed over to Pururava, and as verse number 1, Shukadev Goswami says, he accepted Vanaprast, and off he went to the forest. And at least from the way it's presented here, it appears, well, it does appear, I mean, actually it's pretty clear, that after Sudyumna had gone and taken Vanaprast, then Vaivasvata Manu wanted to get more sons. So he performed severe austerities on the bank of the Yamuna for 100 years, and worshipped the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then he got 10 sons exactly like himself. And among them, Ikshvaku was the senior. And, of course, we remember from Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, how Manu instructed Ikshvaku. Yeah, Ikshvaku was the eldest, although there's another kind of extraordinary history about how Ikshvaku was born, which anyway, it's related in the 9th canto also. So this Prishadra, he was one of the 10. And he, by the order of Vasishta, who is referred to here as the spiritual master, he was engaged at night. He would stay up and he would stand up the whole night with a sword to protect the cows. Srila Prabhupada gives a purport here that we can understand from this that it appears that he didn't marry. This is fairly unusual for people in these big Kshatriya families like Manu. But this Prishadra, we don't really, there's no explanation that I'm aware of, but he didn't marry. And as Prabhupada says, because he was engaged in this way, it's to be understood that he had no dynasty or family of his own. And Prabhupada also notes in this purport how essential it is to protect the cows. That, Prishadra, he is not like just some ordinary security man. He is the son of the king. Yeah. And even Vaivasvata Manu, he's not just your ordinary king. He is the father of all humanity. He is a very extremely important person. One of the, what is he? He's a grandson, isn't he? Is he a grandson of Lord Brahma? Or is he a great-grandson? Anyway, he's one of the earliest great authorities to appear in the line from Brahma, and Prishadra is one of his sons. So Prishadra is not, just like your local security man. At our temples, at bigger temples like in India, there's always some security there. And these security people, they're generally not very important people socially. Yeah, they're just ordinary people working for a job, not earning very much. And Prishadra, he is basically doing that sort of service, even though he's one of the sons of Manu. It's an interesting point, isn't it? If you think about things, there's so many things that come up in the Bhagavatam which are just really interesting little nuances, and you got to sort of think about them, and then you see, wow, yeah, this is something special. So as Prabhupada explains, that we can understand from this vow how essential it is to protect the cows. As we'll read just now, Vasishta curses him because Prishadra accidentally kills a cow, actually. And Vasishta curses him to become a Sudra. And there's a comment, anyway, we'll get there in a moment. There's a comment from, who is it now? It's from Srila Jiva Goswami. Srila Jiva Goswami makes the point that even though Vasishta arguably overreacted, but still it's important to note how concerned he was for the cows. That's a positive point. So anyway, here we are. And Prabhupada's making these points that the cows are so important, including spiritually so extremely important, that even the son of a Kshatriya, son of Vaivasvata Manu, the chief of humanity, he was staying up the whole night just to protect the cows. They didn't hire some security company. He was doing it personally. So if cows, Prabhupada's point here is that if cows are so important, that such an important person as Prishadra would be given this duty, then what can be said of sending cows to the slaughterhouses? It's like incredible craziness. And it's just incredibly inauspicious. The results, what are the results of it going to be? It's just going to be shocking. Yeah, so, okay. So one night, a tiger came in to where the cows were, the land of the cowshed, the verse 4 says, and the cows, of course, panicked. But this tiger grabbed one of the cows, and the cow screamed, and Prishadra, he was not sleeping, at least according to the description that we've read so far. He was not sleeping like many of our security guards in our temples sleep at night. He was not sleeping. He was just somewhere else, just a little way away, dealing with some of his duties as in protecting cows. So he heard the cows scream, and he came over, but it was dark. It was dark. The stars were covered by clouds, and therefore, the verse says, he mistook the cow for the tiger and mistakenly cut off the cow's head with great force. Because he's one of these super powerful Kshatriyas. Yeah, so because the stars were covered by the clouds, he couldn't see, and he made this mistake. And he hit the tiger a little. The ear, one of the ears of the tiger was cut, and the tiger ran away bleeding. And Jiva Goswami says that, it's just a tiny little detail. Srila Jiva Goswami says that along with it being dark, but all the animals were all crowded together, and with the tiger in amongst them, and therefore Prishadra couldn't discern the truth. And therefore, anyway, what happened. In the morning, he saw what had happened, that he'd actually killed a cow, although he thought he'd killed the tiger. And as the verse says, verse number 8, that he was very unhappy. Jiva Goswami makes the point that he was very repentant. He was very repentant for having, even though unknowingly and accidentally, but he killed the cow. So then, we come to verse 9, and there we have it. Vasishta curses him, saying, in your next life, interesting, right? In your next life, you'll not be able to become a Kshatriya. Instead, you'll take birth as a Sudra. As I mentioned, anyway, we'll see when we get there, but as far as I recall, he doesn't take a next life. He just goes back to Godhead. And in this way, the curse is thwarted. But Srila Prabhupada gives an interesting, and I feel it's an important purport here, about Vasishta, his position, and the position of family priests, as opposed to real gurus. Let me just have a look in the actual Sanskrit here. Let me have a look. What is it? Verse 9. Okay. Well, it's actually verse 10. No, wait a minute. Oh, well, anyway. The point comes up that the term used somewhere, where on earth is it? Actually, I'm not sure where it is. Maybe it's elsewhere, actually. That the term for family priest is not guru, but the term generally used, or it's used in the Bhagavatam at least, is purohit. And, you know, those of you who are from Indian backgrounds, you know this word purohit. It means a priest. It doesn't necessarily mean a guru. So Vasishta, though, he is in both positions, it seems. We also read about it yesterday, if you remember, that there Srila Prabhupada made the point in one purport that Vasishta was both the family priest, the purohit, plus he was actually the guru of the family. He was both. He wasn't just, you know, like, well, you know what it's like in Hindu families. The family priest is there, and the children, you know, if they're in a Brahmin family, then the family priest gives them the sacred thread at some point in their childhood, and they call the family priest to do astrological readings and all these sorts of things, right? The family priests, they do these types of things. But a guru, a real Krishna conscious guru, doesn't get caught up in all these types of things. So the functions, generally the functions, there are significant differences, although there are similarities in certain aspects. Like, you know, one thing that family priests do, like I mentioned, they do astrological readings, and they may do readings of the palms of the children, these sorts of things. You may have read how Srila Prabhupada, talking about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada talks about how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, in his younger days, he was an astrologer, an astronomer, and he would also read people's palms. And when he really became established as a guru and the head of a major spiritual institution, still sometimes people would approach him and stick out their hand. Like after class, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would give a class. At the end of the class, before he gets off the Vyasasana to move away, some people gather in front of him So he sort of can't escape. He's caught on the Vyasasam, and sometimes people would stick their hands out and ask him to do a palm reading, to find out about their material fortune, what's going to happen. So Prabhupada explains there that oftentimes, or usually, or sometimes when people would do that, sometimes Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would just refuse, but sometimes he would take their hand and he'd study their hand for 15 some seconds or just some little time, and then he'd close their hand. He just closed their hand, and he would say, "All bad, just chant Hare Krishna." All bad, just chant Hare Krishna. Because he wasn't into it. Because he was serving, he was functioning as a Vaishnava Acharya, or a real guru. So Prabhupada did mention in the previous chapter how Vasishta, it's sort of, anyway, it's one perspective on the situation, because in many ways Vasishta was qualified. You sometimes get this phenomenon where a person in certain ways is very qualified for some role, but then in other ways is lacking qualification for the same role. So Vasishta, he could be seen as being family priest. In fact, he was, but also as guru. And he's been referred to as such already in this chapter. But now, if we look at this purport here, let's just read this purport of verse 9. It appears that Vasishta was not free from tamagun, the mode of ignorance. As the family priest or spiritual master of Prashadra, Vasishta should have taken Prashadra's offense very lightly, but instead Vasishta cursed him to become a Sudra. It is the duty of a family priest not to curse a disciple, but to give him relief through the performance of some sort of atonement. Like we call it prayaschita. This is like family priest will give prayaschita. A guru, like a genuine Krishna conscious guru, generally will not give prayaschita. And you're all familiar with the story of Ajamil and the beginning of the 6th canto. So you know how Shukadev Goswami suggested prayaschita to Parikshit Maharaj, who was Maharaj Parikshit was in anxiety that people were going to go to the hellish planets. The hellish planets were described at the end of the 5th canto. And Parikshit was concerned. These people are going to suffer. How can they be saved? And Shukadev initially suggested, well, they could do prayaschita, some atonement. They've done many things bad, so they have a negative balance of karma. Let them do something good to offset the bad karma. And then they can carry on without the bad karma. But, I'm sure you're familiar with with that whole discussion. But Maharaj Parikshit doesn't accept it. And he says, no, It can't be like that. Please tell me how people can really become delivered. And then Shukadev tells the story of a Jamil who chants the holy names. So anyway, Vasishta, we got a question, didn't we? We read the question. Is he a special person like Narada Muni? Well, we would have to say that he's definitely some sort of special person, because he was not only the family priest for Vaivasvata Manu, but he's the family priest for Maharaj Dasarath, Lord Ram, and their family. And you got to be some sort of special person to have that sort of role in that sort of association. So Vasishta's a special person, but from this, at least from this right here, it would appear he is not as special as Narada Muni. Narada Muni is a really special, very elevated, pure devotee and personal associate of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And, we're all well aware, I'm sure, that Narada Muni appears in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam regularly, preaching to this person and that person and someone else and another one, and he even preaches to Srila Vyasadeva. So Narada Muni, there's no description, at least as Narada Muni, from his previous lifetime when he was a demigod. If you're familiar with that story, his position was not good, so he got cursed to appear as a Sudra, and then he took birth as the son of the maidservant, and then became Narada Muni in the following lifetime. But otherwise, in that lifetime, and in general as Narada Muni, he is like one of the most exalted pure devotee preachers, Mahabhagavats, of just unquestionable total qualification that you can get. Narada Muni appears in Srimad Bhagavatam almost as much as Krishna does. He's just a super important person. Vasishta is special, but he's not on that level. And here we see that Srila Prabhupada is saying, and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes the point also, that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the guru cursed him although he killed the cow unintentionally, akamata. He did not give instructions on atonement, but out of anger cursed him because his intelligence had disappeared. This means Vasishta's intelligence had disappeared. That is because the actions of a family priest are subject to great ignorance. So this is a very important point, actually, and I want to give a little intelligence to it. I want to give a little a little attention to it, I made some notes here about family priests. Let me just find it here. In general, family priests don't have a very good name. They're generally not accepted as bona fide spiritual masters. Generally. We can note, actually, in one of the upcoming verses, I'll just read, it's verse 28, which we'll be coming to shortly. In verse 28, the verse itself says that in that sacrifice, King Indra became intoxicated by drinking a large quantity of soma rasa. The Brahmins received ample contributions, and therefore they were satisfied. And it says a little more also. But anyway, in the purport, Prabhupada says, because of the yajna performed by Maruta, who's another descendant of Manu. So because of the yajna, everyone was pleased, especially the Brahmins and Kshatriyas. And listen to this. Brahmins are interested in receiving contributions as priests. And Kshatriyas are interested in drinking. All of them, therefore, were very satisfied with their different engagements. Anyway, to just say a little bit at least about family priests as distinct from like real bona fide Vaishnav gurus. A classic example, I guess it's the classic example in Srimad Bhagavatam of a family priest who just really doesn't have the proper qualification, certainly couldn't be called a bona fide Vaishnav guru. A great example of that is Shukracharya. In the 8th canto, I think you've just been going through the 8th canto, so you know the story of Bali Maharaj and Shukracharya, and how when Shukracharya understood that Lord Vamana is Vishnu, and Lord Vishnu always takes the side of the demigods, and you have stolen the kingdom of the demigods. So, it seems to me Lord Vishnu is now going to steal the kingdom back from you in the guise of asking for 3 steps of land. He's going to take everything. Yeah, so Shukracharya deduces that this is the likely outcome here. So he tells Bali Maharaj that, listen, even though you already promised to give this little Brahmin 3 steps of land, now don't do it. Don't do it, because he's going to take everything. And Bali Maharaj, of course, wants to still do it, but Shukracharya, I'm sure you went through his logic, his arguments for Bali Maharaj to break his promise. It's really not good at all. But Shukracharya was strongly telling Bali Maharaj that you should break your promise. That what does he say? One might argue that since you've already promised, how can you refuse? O best of the demons, just take from me the evidence of the Bhavricha Shruti, which says that a promise is truthful preceded by the word om, and untruthful if not. And obviously, Lord Vamana had not said om, or Bali Maharaj had not said om when he promised to give the 3 steps of land. So you can break your promise. This is like, well, it's very low-level family priest type of program. Therefore, the safe course is to say no. Although it is a falsehood, it protects one completely. It draws the compassion of others towards oneself, and it gives one full facility to collect money from others for oneself. Haribol. It's amusing in a sense. It's really bad though, isn't it? It's shocking. It's terrible. But what can you expect from the priest of the demons? You can't expect pure Krishna consciousness. Yeah. So family priests cannot be taken as seriously as bona fide spiritual masters. And Vasishta, now of course the interesting thing about Vasishta is that he is referred to, including by the Bhagavatam itself, he's referred to as both the guru and the family priest. In the, let's see, what is it now? Yeah, it's actually in verse 9 itself. In the Sanskrit, Vasishta is referred to as Kula Acharya, which, means family priest, basically. Kula Acharya. That was verse 9. In verse 10, he's referred to in the first line of the Sanskrit as Guru. Evam sapta tu guruna, having been cursed in this way by his guru. So, it's an interesting point. It's an interesting point. Let me just, before I say more about Vasishta himself, let me just mention another example from Shastra, from our books. It's not as radical example at all as Shukracharya, but it's an interesting example of a family priest, and who's also a devotee, but it appears that he's not so elevated because one of his disciples disobeys him very blatantly. And there's no mention of anything negative happening to the disciple. So this is the example, very interesting example, of Yadunandana Acharya in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Yadunandana Acharya is a close associate of Lord Chaitanya. He's actually a fairly close associate at least, and a close associate of Vasudev Dutt, great associate of Lord Chaitanya, and he was the family priest of the family of Raghunath Das Goswami, his parents. He was the family priest, and he's actually referred to as the Diksha Guru of Raghunath Das Goswami. Where is it? Have I noted it? I haven't. I didn't actually note down that You can find it in Chaitanya Charitamrita. I forget what chapter it is. Anyway, yeah, so the story is that Raghunath Das, he's not Raghunath Das Goswami yet, he's just Raghunath Das. He's a householder, actually, living with his parents and his wife, and he's met Lord Chaitanya. He has met Lord Chaitanya, and he's met Lord Nityananda also. And Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda have very deeply affected him, extremely deeply. And Raghunath Das, he really wants to leave home and just go to Puri and just join Lord Chaitanya full time and just get out of his family situation. But it's not so easy. Not so easy for different reasons. But one reason was that he was kept under guard, like physically guarded. And Yadunandan Acharya, anyway, what happened was that Raghunath Das, he really wanted to leave. So one night, Yadunandan Acharya, as the family priest, was in charge of the worship of the family deities, and his different disciples would do the puja and everything. So one night, late one night, the disciple who was meant to do the final puja, whatever, putting the deities to rest or whatever, somehow or other, he, according to how it's put in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he left the service. Somehow or other, doesn't really say how, but he left the service and there was no one was going to do it, and it was late. So Yadunandan Acharya asked Raghunath Das to wake up some disciple and get the disciple to do this last puja. But Raghunath Das, he understood, because all the security men had taken rest, it was late at night, all the other disciples had taken rest. There was no one really watching him, so he understood he could escape. So he offered that, don't you worry, you go take rest, Yadunandan Acharya, you go take rest, I'll do the final puja. So off went Yadunandan Acharya, thinking that all was well. However, from the description given, Raghunath Das, at least there is no mention that he did the final puja. Maybe he did. But definitely what he did, when Yadunandan Acharya had gone to take rest, Raghunath left. He ran. And he was traveling 30 miles a day. 30 miles means almost 50 kilometers a day. He was traveling to reach Lord Chaitanya. Yeah, so he went there and he joined Lord Chaitanya, and it was ecstatic. There's no mention of Yadunandan Acharya cursing him or, of him getting any reaction, even though, as far as we can see, Yadunandan Acharya is more advanced than Vasishta Muni. because, Vasishta Muni, he sort of loses it a bit. So back to Vasishta and the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada speaks strongly that he should have taken the offense lightly. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says basically the same thing, that he was subject to great ignorance. Jiva Goswami says, although the atonement should have been slight, the reason for losing his caste was the Guru's compassion for the cow. That's an interesting point. The Guru felt compassionate for the cow so much that he reacted so strongly. But otherwise, the general consensus more is that Vasishta shouldn't have really done like that. So therefore, it appears Vasishta, even though in certain respects he's special, he's very special. He was accepted by Dasarath Maharaj as the family priest, and he worked with Lord Ram a lot in different ways, and Lord Ram was very respectful towards him, but at the same time he had disqualification. Ultimately, even though he had real qualification in certain important ways. I can give you another example, also from the Bhagavatam. It's another very interesting example. It's the example of Kardama Muni in the third canto. Kardama Muni, I don't know if you remember all the details, but he performed, in order to get the association of the Supreme Lord, he performed meditation for 10,000 years. In other words, he was pretty serious. He was pretty serious. And he was a devotee, but he was like a bit of a mixture of a mystical yogi and a devotee, at least be in the earlier stages, maybe up till the time he married Devahuti, something like that. So anyway, Kardama Muni, after 10,000 years of meditation on the Lord, for his spiritual development, the Lord appeared to him and asked him, okay, what do you want? And well, I assume you know what Kardama asked for. Kardama said, please give me a wife. And that was Devahuti. Of course, anyway, it's just an interesting situation. Very interesting. From what we are advised to do, na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim. We are advised along those lines to really try to become detached from all these things. But Kardama Muni, after 10,000 years, he still felt he really had to go through household life. And he did, at least until Lord Kapila was born, and then he left. So, therefore, my point is, we do get these interesting cases where on one hand there's great qualification, on the other hand there's some mixture. at least what appears to be some mixture. Yeah. And it would appear from this that Vasishta, even though he's very special, it appears that there's some mixture there. Okay, anyway, let's carry on, because we're actually going a bit slower than I really wanted to. So, let's see. Well, I tell you what, devotees, shall we take a break? Yeah, okay, hang on, before you take a break, I'm just wondering, more than half of our devotees don't have their video on. I'm just wondering, are they trying to escape, or I'm just wondering actually, for what? I think when we we'll take a break for 10 minutes, but then when we come back, can you please have your video on? It's really pretty, it's not so personal to have just your name, even though your names are very nice. And I'm sure you're very nice, but okay. All right, so 10 minutes break. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Narayanananda from Singapore. Hari Bol. Oh, Hare Krishna. Narayanananda. Hare Krishna. How nice to see you. Hari Bol. Shri Krishna Chaitanya. Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Bhakti Nrsinga Maharaj, Hare Bol. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, devotees. Yes, please let us get back into it. And like I said, if you don't mind, can you please put your video on? Even though your names are very nice, we would rather see your very nice smiling faces. Alrighty, so let's see. Where are we? We're obviously not going to finish chapter 2 and chapter 3, but it's okay, it's all right, it doesn't matter. So, okay, now, family priests, we've kind of dealt with that, I would say, and Vasishta. I think, as far as we're able under the circumstances, we have dealt with that. So now we go on to verse 10. It's very interesting that when Prashadra was cursed, he accepted the curse with folded hands. Then, having controlled his senses, he took the vow of brahmacharya. It seems he was not married, like he was not married yet, but, perhaps he was going to become married because, generally, almost always the Kshatriyas do. So, Vishwanath Chakravarti, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Srila Jiva Goswami says, he responded humbly to the curse. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that with folded hands, he accepted the curse as mercy. He had devotion to Guru. He did not say, "Why did you uselessly curse me?" without reflecting first. Though cursed by his Guru, remaining faithful to Guru, he attained liberation without obstacles. This is the lesson from this story. Muni Priyam, Muni Priyam means a vow of celibacy. So this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. This is the lesson from this story, that if one remains faithful to the spiritual master, even though, it happens sometimes the spiritual master may give some rather sort of drastic treatment, if you take it nicely, then you will make great progress. So, I prepared a whole thing about this, actually. It's how many pages of notes, I forget. That's a whole lot of notes I prepared, 7 pages. Let me just mention one thing. I think let me just mention one thing, or maybe a couple of things. Well, actually, yesterday, was it yesterday? My gosh, I forget. Was it yesterday I spoke about how Srila Prabhupada was chastised by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta? Did I tell that story here? I'm giving so many classes every day that I forget. All right, let me just tell you the story. That Prabhupada, it was in the morning. Yeah. Yes. It was on Sunday morning. Yeah, it was on Sunday morning. Srila Prabhupada was attending a class given by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta at number 1 Ultadunka Road in Calcutta, that famous place. And sitting next, Prabhupada was sitting at the back. There's quite a number of devotees. If I remember correctly, if I do, there may have been about 100 devotees. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is giving class, Prabhupada's at the back, and sitting next to Prabhupada is an elderly devotee who has bad hearing. And so every now and then, as the class is going on, the elderly devotee turns to Prabhupada and asks, "What did he say?" And Prabhupada turns to him, and Prabhupada tells him, what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said. So, in the middle of the class, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta stopped and pointed to Prabhupada and said, "You, Babu, would you like to come and sit here and speak?" I'm sure you know this story. It's a famous story. It's in Leelamrita. Yeah, would you like to come here and speak? And, you can imagine everyone's looking at Prabhupada like, "Oh, what are you doing?" It must have been extremely embarrassing. And actually, Prabhupada was just trying to do a nice thing. Prabhupada was just trying to do a nice thing to help a devotee. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, it's no criticism at all of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta that he didn't appreciate the disturbance. Prabhupada himself would sometimes stop classes and particularly with mothers with children, tell them to go out. And as they go out, put their hand over the mouth of the child. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada, he didn't get upset. Prabhupada says that he would, afterwards, he would remember it from time to time. And Prabhupada said that later, whenever he would remember it, he would treasure that memory. He would treasure the memory like, I really got mercy. So, and this is a very interesting example, as Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, this is the lesson that if if one can accept the chastisement from the spiritual master humbly, one will get great mercy. And if one becomes sort of, huffy and says, well, I wasn't, this happened, that happened, or something, at best, one will not get the same mercy. Let me tell you a little story that one devotee told me. I won't mention his name, but he was very close with Srila Prabhupada as one of his secretaries. He was close to Prabhupada. And he noticed at one point that every day Srila Prabhupada would chastise him for something, at least one time. Every day without fail, Prabhupada chastised him. And this devotee noticed that sometimes Prabhupada would chastise him for doing something which actually he had not done. Someone else had done that wrong thing. But now this devotee, he got the chastisement. But he hadn't done anything. He had not done anything wrong. And so one day he decided that the next time Srila Prabhupada chastises me for doing something which I have not done, I will tell him that Srila Prabhupada, actually, it wasn't actually me, it was someone else. Krishna Das. It was someone else. So, sure enough, pretty soon, Prabhupada chastised him, saying that you've done this wrong, when actually it was another devotee who had done that thing wrong. So this devotee, he said to Prabhupada that Srila Prabhupada, it wasn't actually me, it was such and such. And Srila Prabhupada said, I know. I'm just trying to break your false ego. And this devotee told me personally this story in 1978, just after Prabhupada, just after the Mayapur festival, just after Prabhupada left this world. So yeah, to be able to accept the chastisement of the spiritual master, even when it may actually be inaccurate, on the objective level, but to be able to deal with it nicely and not get into some sort of thing. This is very good, actually. It's very purifying, and one will make advancement. Whereas, if we become sort of judgmental about the spiritual master, and when or if the spiritual master maybe makes an apparent mistake, like sometimes Prabhupada would forget the Sanskrit of a verse, or he would say it wrongly, like it's a sort of a mistake on a certain level. So to kind of find fault with the spiritual master, and particularly if the spiritual master chastises you, it's not good. It's really not good. And without going into great detail, I would like to mention it's one of the great classic examples in that regard. It's a very famous story from Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's the story of Ramachandra Puri. I'm sure, I imagine you're all familiar with that story. I don't have to go through all the details, although it's a great story, and I have been through it in great detail many times. But Ramachandra Puri, he was a disciple of Madhavendra Puri, but he had that critical sort of nature. And, like I said, without going into detail, when Madhavendra Puri was about to leave this world, and many disciples and people were coming to pay their last respects before he passed away, so Ramachandra Puri came also. And he, there he was with Madhavendra Puri. Madhavendra Puri was incapacitated, and Madhavendra Puri was reciting a very important and very elevated verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Ayadina Dayadranathe, Maturanatha Kadavalokise, Hridayam Twada Loka Kataram, Dayata Brahmyati Kim Karomyaham. O my Lord, O most merciful Master, O Master of Mathura, when shall I see you again? Because of my not seeing you, my agitated heart has become unsteady. O most beloved one, what shall I do now? Kim karom yaham, what shall I do? So Madhavendra Puri was repeating this verse and crying, feeling separation, that I'm so unqualified, and now I'm going to die just in a matter of days, and I haven't achieved the goal of life. And Kim karom yaham, what should I do? And Ramachandra Puri, he came in and he saw the scene and he heard, and he said to Madhavendra Puri that, you shouldn't be in this emotional state, at this critical point in your life. You should actually fix your mind on Brahman and detach yourself, Get spiritual about it. Don't be emotional. And Madhavendra Puri, of course, understood this person as a first-class nonsense. So he didn't actually curse him exactly, but he just told him that get out, that you get out of here. And he told him, if I see you at the time of death, I don't know what my destination will be. So you just get out. And when Ramachandra Puri got out, he got all critical. That, I was giving good advice. Why did he treat me like that? You follow? Naughty guru, naughty spiritual master. You mustn't treat me like that. I'm giving you good advice. So it's described there in the course of that narration. It's quite a substantial narration. It's described there that as a result, he became even worse. He became even more critically minded. And he became more or less a Mayavadi, even though he was actually a Vaishnav sannyasi. And on the other hand, I just want to read a verse here. This is Chaitanya Charitamrita, Anchalila chapter 8, verse 32. Mahad anugraha nigrahera sakshi dui jane, e dui dware shikaila jagajane. Ishvara Puri received the blessing of Madhavendra Puri, whereas Ramachandra Puri received a rebuke from him. Therefore, these two persons, Ishvara Puri and Ramachandra Puri, are examples of the objects of a great personality's benediction and punishment. Madhavendra Puri instructed the entire world by presenting these two examples. So Ramachandra Puri, we just mentioned, he was already bad, he was already critically minded, negatively minded, and he was even ready to criticize his spiritual master. And as a result, he became worse and eventually criticized Lord Chaitanya. It's a long story, well, I'm not going to go through the whole story, although it's a great story. Eventually he criticized Lord Chaitanya. Whereas Ishvara Puri, he was also a disciple of Madhavendra Puri. He also came at the end, and seeing his spiritual master incapacitated, he rendered the most humble and even, sort of challenging type of very personal services, cleaning up with his own hands the stool and urine of his spiritual master, and bathing his whole body, all these things. And while he was doing it, he would always chant and sing. And Madhavendra Puri was so appreciative that he blessed him. May you become a great devotee and a great lover of God. So like the verse says here, Ishvara Puri, he is the example, classic example of a person who is the object of a great personality's benediction. He became such a devotee that Lord Chaitanya was so impressed with him. Lord Chaitanya felt, I must accept him as my spiritual master, and he did. Whereas Ramachandra Puri, he just became like really unpleasant, offensive devotee number one, pretty much. And it's interesting, it's kind of amusing, actually. Eventually, Ramachandra Puri came to Jagannath Puri, and there he offended Lord Chaitanya. He stayed for some time. He offended Lord Chaitanya and various others. Eventually he left. And when he left Jagannath Puri, all the devotees felt happy. They all breathed a sigh of relief. He has gone now. Oh, good. How wonderful. So we do not want to become that sort of devotee, that when we leave a place, the devotees say, good. He's gone. I'm glad he's gone. We don't want to be like that. Therefore, we should always, with all the devotees, and particularly the great devotees, we should really interact with them very humbly and very nicely. And so I'm going to go on from here now. There's a whole lot more I could say, actually. But let me say two things further about this pastime. Prabhupada says that Srila Bhaktivedanta says that Ramachandra Puri had achieved nishta in criticism. How's that? That's a good one. He had achieved nishta. We would like to achieve nishta in Krishna consciousness. He achieved nishta in criticism. He had a steady desire to criticize others. It was based on a mistaken desire. a mistaken desire. The mistaken desire was that I am a senior devotee, I'm a sannyasi, because he was having that name Ramachandra Puri means he was a sannyasi. So I'm a sannyasi, I'm a senior devotee, I must try and help the devotees to progress. So I will try to help them progress by pointing out what their faults are. That was his idea. He thought he was trying to help them, but it was a mistaken desire, a wrong desire. It appears Krishna conscious, but it's contaminated. Right, so that was one thing. And the second thing is that Ramachandra Puri, don't worry about him too much, because it's explained that he is an eternal associate of Krishna, Ramachandra Puri. In Krishna Leela, Ramachandra Puri is Jatila, the mother-in-law of Srimati Radharani. And if you don't know who Jatila is, anyway, I'm sure you all know. She's a character. All right. So anyway, we're just moving on here. So 11 to 13 and then 14, Prishadra, because he had this type of consciousness, he was peaceful, he controlled his senses, and he left home, achieved pure devotional service. And then finally in verse 14, the point is made in verse 14 that in the end there was a forest fire, and the verse says he took the opportunity. Sounds like he just walked into the fire, but one way or another he died in a fire, forest fire, and he went back to Godhead. Without having to take birth as a Sudra, according to the curse. Because that was the curse, next birth. But actually didn't, he went back to Godhead. So Prabhupada gives a purport here to verse 14, explaining this point and these points, but I think we've sort of covered these points in what we've been saying about how one should accept chastisement as a blessing. We could even say if you become chastised not by your guru, even not by a senior devotee, but just by some devotee, some devotee chastises you for who knows what. Maybe it's just a nonsense chastisement anyway. So what to do then? What if you get chastised, some nonsense chastisement by someone who's a bit of a nonsense themselves? What to do then? Well, I mean, that's a big subject. We could say a lot about that. But one thing is that, in many cases, devotees chastise other devotees because the other devotee did something Krishna conscious but in a wrong way. Yeah. They did something, they're doing some service, but they made some mistake, some error in their devotional service, and so some other devotee chastises them. Why did you do that, you nonsense? But, sometimes the mind deviates. Sometimes devotees' minds deviate. I don't know if it ever happens to any of you, but, these things happen. I think I'm right. I think they happen to all of us, actually. Our minds deviate, and sometimes we may go into some little meditation on something we shouldn't meditate on, if you know what I mean. So, which is worse than what that person is chastising you for? Maybe you spilt some prasad, or anyway, whatever. So one way of sort of responding to chastisement from someone who's not really like your authority or your guru, you can always tell them, listen, I'm actually a lot worse than what you're saying. You're saying I'm a bad devotee because I dropped something or something happened. Actually, I'm a lot worse. In fact, what your criticism of me, you are practically praising me, actually, because I'm a lot worse than what you're saying. Anyway, that's just a thought. Okay, so look, here we are now. Here we are now. And Prabhupada explains in the purport there that he avoided becoming a Sudra. And he went back to Godhead. Haribol. Now, from here, it is largely sort of more like lists of different of the descendants of Vaivasvata. Kavi, here in verse 15, Kavi was the youngest of the 10. And even as a young man, well, even it seems like practically a child, he left home with his friends and became fully Krishna conscious, went back to Godhead. Then, if we carry on from verse 16 to verse 22, the descendant, now it's another son, Karusha. Now it's discussing his descendants. They became a dynasty of Kshatriyas, whereas Drishta, another son, his sons became Brahmins. And Prabhupada gives a purport there in which Prabhupada acknowledges this well-known point that people may change from their birth position, even from a position which is not just their birth position, but through training, people can change. Therefore, we shouldn't judge people by birth. I mean, that's a classic, to judge people by birth. My God. We should judge them by their actual natures and qualities. Let me just tell you an interesting little story, an experience of my own. From many years ago, it's more than 20 years ago. It's probably 25 years ago or something like, even possibly 30. I was in Vrindavan, and a small group of us, like 3 or 4 of us, decided to take a trip to Jaipur. to Karoli and then Jaipur. And, to get to Karoli, and then from Karoli to Jaipur, you got to take some back roads a bit. It's not like the main Delhi-Jaipur highway. So we had this driver. We had a taxi, and we had this driver, and he's still there. He's still there in Vrindavan. I see him from time to time. And his name is, I don't know if it's his nickname or what, but everyone calls him Panditji. And he's from a Brahmin family, but he's a taxi driver. And I asked him, so, I can manage a little bit of Hindi. And so I asked him in Hindi, because he couldn't speak English at all, I asked him, are you a Brahmin? And he pulled out his Brahmin thread and said, Hanji, may Brahmin ho. And I said, oh, okay. Although he's a taxi driver, and he's still a taxi driver. So off we went. We went to Karoli early in the morning, and then later, midday or whatever, we set off to Jaipur from Karoli on some back road, and we came to a crossroads. The road forked directly. You could either go right or you could either go left. That was it. And there was a sign in Hindi only in Hindi, that in one direction was, I think Gangapur is the name of the place. It's on the main road to Jaipur. And then the other sign was to somewhere else, but in Hindi only. And as it happens, I can read it. And because I studied Sanskrit for a while. So I looked at the sign, and, it's very clear. Okay, that's the road to Gangapur. That's where we're meant to go. So, but Panditji, he stopped the car in front of the sign, and he's looking at the sign. And I told him, Panditji, look, Gangapur, Dekhiye, Gangapur, Waha. But I'm a white man, so he didn't trust me. So Panditji got out of the car, asked some fellow who was walking by, which is the road to Gangapur? And the person pointed. So I understood. Panditji is illiterate. He cannot read. And, I taught myself at least to read the alphabet. It only took a couple of weeks or something. It wasn't a big job. And this fellow, he's Panditji by birth. So anyway, beware of the phenomenon of, spiritual position by birth, because it's really not real. So we go through now. I'm going through all these verses here, and frankly, I don't feel the need to read all these verses, because it's just who is the son of who? Who is the son of who? We've got one who became a Vaishya, verses 23 and 24. And in 27, King Maruta, who was extremely beautiful, interesting. Oh no, his sacrificial paraphernalia was extremely beautiful. So he's the one who did the sacrifice where the Brahmins, they were very happy because they got contributions, and Kshatriyas were very happy to be able to drink. And then, so it just basically goes on like that until we reach the end of the chapter. Are you okay with that? That we don't go through all these details of who's the son of who and who's not the son of who? Are you okay with that? I think it's okay. Yeah, I think it's okay. All right, so we have a few minutes left. If you're okay, if you're okay, we actually have 2 questions, it seems. It looks like 2 questions. Let's just try to answer them, and then we'll call it a day, and we'll do chapter 3 tomorrow. And anyway, we'll try and start chapter 4 tomorrow. So first, this is from, it looks like the Mayapur Institute. We can happily accept chastising from the spiritual master because we love him or we aspire to love him. How do we accept chastisement from someone we don't love? Yeah, well, that's a good question. The thing is, there's a very important principle. It is the principle of humility. It is the principle of humility on one hand. Like, I'll give you an example. Srila Prabhupada, when he was first in America, I'm sure you've read the story how it was Memorial Weekend, if you're familiar with the American calendar. It was Memorial Weekend, and it's a public holiday. And Prabhupada became very sick. Actually, he was having, I think it was a mild stroke. Like a very mild stroke or a very mild, some sort of heart, severe palpitation, something like that. But they couldn't get a doctor because it was a public holiday. So finally they found one doctor, and he came to look at Prabhupada and try to diagnose. And so the doctor came, and he was drunk. He was intoxicated. He'd been drinking liquor. And he didn't take the whole thing seriously. That maybe Prabhupada was really ill. He just looked at Prabhupada and said, there's nothing wrong with him. He just needs more exercise. You know this story. It's quite a famous story. He just needs more exercise. It's in the Leelamrita also, as far as I remember. And then off he went. Actually, Prabhupada was having some sort of mild heart attack, something of that sort. It was just not a joke at all. And this man was a drunk doctor. So it was just a nonsense situation. But Prabhupada, he accepted that sort of, you could say chastisement or advice or something like that from the silly fool. And it was then that Prabhupada started his program of his morning walk. Prabhupada's morning walk program, it is a super famous program of Srila Prabhupada. Extremely famous. But he started it specifically because that drunk doctor, said he just needs some more exercise. He should get more exercise. So Prabhupada, as they say, he took gold from a dirty place. So, if you're talking about being chastised by other devotees who you don't love, you should try and see if it's true. Is there something I can gain from this? Because believe me, it's very difficult for us. It is more difficult for us to appreciate what is wrong with us than it is for other devotees to understand what is wrong with us. Yeah. Therefore, in that sense, devotees are like mirrors. In order to see yourself, you need a mirror. If you don't have a mirror, look at right now. You can't see yourself. I mean, your face, your head, which is the main part. You can't see yourself. You need a mirror to see yourself. So devotees can be like mirrors. Therefore, generally, if some devotee feels that it's important enough to chastise you, at the very least, it's a good idea to seriously consider what they've said. And it's quite likely that you'll learn something from it. But if you just become defensive, that no, I'm not like that. Well, that's defense, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. That's defense. It's not very good. If it's really important, like if someone complains to the temple president that you've done something bad, and therefore, you should be kicked out of the temple or removed from your service. Some responsibility should be taken away. If it's a serious situation, then you should explain. You should clarify. That you should do for the sake of the truth. But if it's just some sort of social interaction like that, it's good to try and see, is there something I can learn from it? And here's the last one in regard to verse 14. It is very rare. This is from Navadvip Chandra, is it? Navadvip. Chandra, Prabhu. There you are. Okay, thank you. Haribol. It is very rare that we hear of a curse not manifesting due to the person's devotional service. For example, Parikshit Maharaj was still bitten by a snake bird despite continuous hearing of the Bhagavatam. Under what circumstances does a curse manifest or not when performing devotional service? Yeah, well, nowadays, today, curses generally, it's extremely rare that curses will manifest today. You see, one problem with cursing people is that if you do not have the mystical potency, it's not really a spiritual potency as much as it's a mystical potency. And if you don't have the mystical potency to sort of enforce the curse onto the person, the curse will come back on you. Yeah, you will receive the curse. The curser will receive the curse. we're going to see tomorrow or probably the next day or whenever it is, Ambarish Maharaj Devasa Muni, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, tells Devasa Muni that if someone tries to curse a Vaishnav, then the curse comes back on them, and therefore it is the curser who will undergo pain and not the person who is cursed. Yeah, so therefore in regard to us, we should not curse because we don't have the potency. And if people curse us, they're just being stupid. And they really shouldn't do that. Because if it's gonna hurt anyone, it'll hurt them. And just the fact that they pronounced a curse means they're in bad consciousness. So, but otherwise, like back in Vedic times and all that, generally the curses manifest. Generally the curses manifest. This, he became such a great devotee, he went back to Godhead. The thing was, I would say, my understanding would be that if Vasishta had actually cursed, what's his name again? Prashadra. If Vasishta had actually cursed him, that you become a Sudra, like now. As far as I understand, he would have become a Sudra. And it's a little interesting that I think it's Jiva Goswami makes the point in this regard that he sort of became, Jiva Goswami says, since he was a devotee of Vasudeva, although he was a Sudra, he attained liberation. Anyway, but I would say that if Vasishta had cursed him immediately, become a Sudra like today, he would have become a Sudra. Because, people like Vasishta, he is very powerful. He is a special person. He's extremely powerful. Anyway, those are some thoughts on the subject. Okay, devotees, Hare Krishna. Thank you for your association. I hope you're finding it worthwhile and not too sort of heavy on your heads. And we'll see you tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maharaj.
His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Swami Maharaj Ki Jai.
Haribol. आप लोग सब की जय हो. Jai. My Hindi is not good, actually. Okay, devotees, Haribol. Haribol. See you in an hour and a half or something like that for japa and then Ishapanishad. Hare Krishna.